Now, at every company,
Yeah,
any one group of employees is always complaining about some other group of employees.
That's-
it's,
that's
you know,
what we do.
either it's the workflow, some part of the workflow, or the management, or whatever.
Yeah.
What are the sorts of things that animators grumble about, or grumbled about, especially when you were there?
it's different today. I don't, it's kind of funny. I'm trying to think back and what were the complaints? What's different today as opposed to back when I was a kid working on Sleeping Beauty? The only thing we were concerned about was the quality of the work and the standard,
Okay.
the level of quality we were required to meet. And, passing muster, getting approvals from our directing animators, getting approvals from Walt Disney himself. We weren't concerned with schedules all that much.
Okay.
Yeah, we had requirement for so much work having to get done because after all, you've got to have that, otherwise your picture would never get finished. There's only so much money, there's only so much time. But I don't recall worrying about a lot of the things people worry about today.
Really?
And I think one example was when I worked on the Jungle Book, because this was my first job working in story. And so it was my first time in the big time. That is, I was moved upstairs to the second floor, as I call it, to work with the big boys. Second floor was where the big boys, that's where they did the story, and that's where all the important stuff happened. But I noticed that today there's a lot of concern about how much money the picture is going to make. Is it going to make back its production costs? How much profit will it make? What will the opening weekend box office be? All of those concerns that I hear over and over again today. Back when we were making films, we had one obligation, that is to make the best film possible. The only person I had to answer to was Walt Disney. And all Walt cared about was give him the best work you can give. How much the film will make ultimately, he didn't care. It was never mentioned. Opening weekend box office, nobody even thought about opening weekend box office. When the film was finished, the film was released, and it would go out and make money or not make money. That wasn't our concern. Our concern was not how much money is this film going to make. Our concern was, did we do our best work, do a good job? Did we please Walt Disney? That was all that mattered. That was all that mattered. Today, it's all about the money. How much did your film make? What was the domestic gross? What was the international gross? How much did it make in Spain? How much did it make in, how much did it do on DVD? And it's like all of these things that have nothing to do with what we do.
So even the artists talk that way nowadays?
Yeah. I find that there's almost an obsession with how a film does, financially. It's not whether how good the film is, it's have we done our best work. But then again, I guess we're not really pleasing a Walt Disney today. Nobody, I felt that my job was easier back then. When I was working for probably the toughest boss ever was actually my easiest job because all I knew was if I pleased Walt, that was all I had to do. And how the film did later, I had no control over that. I have no control over whether people are going to go see the movie or not go see it. You can't make them go see it if they don't want to. You can't control that. But it seems today we are obsessed with that. It's all people talk about. Now maybe that's driven by the stock market and by all the studio concerns. Studios have to make money and all that. But and studios always had to make money. I mean, it was the same back then too. We always had to make money. So sometimes we did and sometimes we didn't. Yeah. And he was funny. You should mention that dictator thing. He was viewed by some as a dictator. I guess you can't help but have that comparison when you've got essentially a one-man studio, where you've got a company where everything is pretty much dictated by one man. You please one man.
Right.
You do what he wants.
Yeah.
You do it his way, not your way, his way. And if you weren't on board with that, then you best work someplace else. Because when you work for Disney, you really did work for Walt Disney. When I joined the story team to work on the Jungle Book, and people, years later, decades later, people grumbled about the film and they said, well, yeah, I saw the Jungle Book. And I don't think it's, yada, yada, yada. I don't think it's a faithful adaptation of Kipling. And I tell them, hey, look, I wasn't working for Kipling. And I wasn't working for you. I was working for Walt Disney. I made the movie he wanted to make. That was my job. I did my job. Whether you like the movie or not is not my concern. I was trying to please the boss, and that's all I had to do. And so, in that sense, yeah, we kind of work for a dictator. But Apple employees, when they work for Steve Jobs, they also work for a dictator because everything was done Steve's way. Then there were all kinds of myths too going on in the 50s that I didn't believe. I don't know why I didn't believe them, but I didn't believe them. I was told by many among my group that Walt Disney doesn't hire black people. Doesn't hire Jews either,
Oh,
They had a
geez.
whole list, no blacks, no Jews, no Asians. No, if you're not in that group, don't even think about applying there because they won't even let you in the gate. Well, that wasn't true. Diane Disney actually sought me out to have me, say that on film. She was trying to dispel all of these myths about her father. That Walt Disney was a racist, he was an anti-Semite, he hated everybody. No, I can say that, first-hand experience that Walt Disney gave everybody hell. Yeah, he beat up on everybody. Yeah.
So tell me about the first floor and the second floor and the third floor. You talked about actually working in a bullpen when you first, and that was what, animators, assistants, or whatever that was?
It was kind of like the equivalent of a secretarial pool. When we all started out as young artists, they put all of us artists into a large room, and that was known as the bullpen, mainly because they were all men anyway. There's hardly ever I don't ever recall a woman in the bullpen, as a matter of fact. But so all the men were put in this big room, and that's how we began our apprenticeship. And then later on, as you moved up the ladder, you would be assigned to an animator, and then you would move out of that big room into a smaller room, and it was generally 2 artists to an office. And that's how it worked. You would have your animator, who usually got the choice window seat, and then you assistant, you got the seat by the door. But you had a private office. You had a door. You could close the door. You could open it if you wanted to let the noise in, or if you wanted privacy, you just close the door. It's a really great working environment.
Was that on the first floor?
That was on the first floor.
Okay.
Animation was on the first floor. That's the way animation worked. That was all on the first floor. Larger bullpens for the young artists who were starting out. Smaller offices, 2 artists to an office. If you were really important, like a big shot, got your own office. 1 person to an office. If you were Milt Call or Frank Thomas, you got just you. That was floor number 1. Second floor was background and story, and the director's units. Matter of fact, it was probably more so director's units and the background department. Second floor had the all of these floors had wings: B wing, A wing, C wing, D wing, all the way down. And the directors generally had a directorial unit in each wing. Each of those wings had a small projection room called a sweatbox. And so that's where the directors worked with their team, which was usually a story team and a layout team. And then down the hall there was usually a large room where the background artists would work. So they had a large room, sort of the background bullpen, not quite as crowded, because maybe four or 5 artists to a room, and all the background artists worked in one large room, and that's how that worked. Third floor was the super level of the really, really important people. That's where Walt Disney had his office, and that's where his producers and his really, really top story guys were on the third floor. Guys like Bill Pete was up on the third floor. And those story guys, because they were really, really important, they had a large office, huge story room. So they had loads of space because they had artwork pinned up, and they had storyboards all around the room. And so they were very exciting offices because they were just filled with artwork, So it was just like this cornucopia of art. So that was very exciting. And they were up there, so Walt had easy access to these story rooms. With Walt, it was all about story. And so that's why if you were on the first floor, you would rarely see Walt Disney. If you were on the second floor, you might see him a few times. If you're on the third floor, and you saw him all the time. So it depends on, if you wanted to hide from Walt, be on the first floor, because he's seldom coming down. He did come down on occasion, but you could almost count them. His visits might be maybe 3 times a year. Second floor, you might see him once a month. Third floor, you might see him every day.
Well, now, where was Ink and Paint and all this?
Ink and Paint was in a separate building. They were in a separate building across the street from the
Okay.
animation building. And notice how they kept the men and women
Yes,
separated,
yes.
not by floors, but by a
By
separate
buildings,
building,
whole
all
dorms.
together.
That bullpen that you talked about, what was
Yeah.
the atmosphere like in there? Were those people talking, or was
Oh,
it
congenial.
quiet?
Oh, yeah,
Uh-huh.
jovial.
You'd go in there.
Combative on occasion if the discussion moved around the politics, because artists tend to be very opinionated. And of course, we used to joke about we had everything from communist to fascist in the art department, which made for spirited discussions. Now, the positive side, and I've written about this on my blog and other columns. What was so cool about this, that these artists would sometimes yell and scream at each other all day long, and call each other names, and at the end of the day, they'd go out for a drink together. So it was almost as though all the bluster and all of the, you so-and-so, I don't know what's wrong with you, you blankety blank, leftist, socialist, knucklehead. They'd yell and scream at each other all day, and then at the end of the day, it's 5:30. Let's go to the bar and have a drink, and they were all good pals. So what I found so amazing about that Disney in Times Past is that you could be best of friends with people you totally disagreed with. Sounds like a contradiction, but I found that as a kid, I found that so amazing and so wonderful. And once again, I have to say it, you could be best of friends with a person you totally disagreed with, which I found really amazing.
Could you? Well, no, we don't. I was going to give me an example of a communist and a fascist, but
Oh well, we got. I guess Walt would be an example of the wild, crazy progressive. And I had to pick somebody. Let's pick, say, Ken Anderson, who was probably more conservative in his views. Ken had a very. I don't know what these guys' background or their upbringing, but some people were just more conservative, financially, socially, politically. Walt was the total contradiction, because Walt was this arch conservative with the Nixon bumper sticker on his little go-kart, and yet could be amazingly progressive. He was a total contradiction. Far from being, as he's been often accused of, being racist and anti-Semite, his only requirement for people coming into his studio was their talent. That's all he cared about. He didn't care about the color of their skin or what church they went to. He cared about their talent. At a time when it was, you wouldn't even think about an attitude of gay rights. Walt was not even concerned about one's sexual orientation. Yeah. And this goes all the way back to the 50s and 60s. Just didn't interest him. It was not an issue. We had people at the studio who were,
you knew.
You knew, yeah. But if their work was good, Walt didn't care, couldn't care less. So like I said, the guy was amazingly, he was a real contradiction. Conservative, progressive, and a man who's difficult to define. Couldn't put him in a box. You couldn't say he's this.